My parents used to instill in me the value of doing the right thing. That way, when I try to use the specifics of their words to argue that I hadn't violated them, they'd still call me out saying, "You knew that wasn't the right thing to do." And I could never mount a sensible argument against doing the right thing. Fast forward a few years, more than a few years, and I find myself in Austin. I've known about this church doing the right thing for Austin's LGBTQ community for practically all the time I've been here since 1993. Back then, the world was in the middle of another health crisis, the AIDS crisis. To put it lightly, gay people were treated horribly and immensely cruel. I'm not talking about gay men, but also the courageous lesbian women who did so much while their male counterparts were incapacitated. All were ostracized and mistreated by many religious organizations that withheld from us the compassion their theological text promised everyone. Unitarian Universalists in First UU was different. They did the right thing. In this congregation, there are and were several prominent Austin physicians who helped those afflicted with AIDS during that time, some risking their livelihoods by facilitating the sharing of expensive drugs from patients who had passed away with those who are still living. And do you remember the Mosley Music Marathon? Does that ring a bell with anyone here? That was one of Austin's first music festivals, started by this church as an annual event in the 1980s and 1990s. And the money went to AIDS Services of Austin to help those living with HIV and AIDS. That was the right thing to do, but then there's more. You remember hearing about the Stonewall Rebellion in June 1969, right? Everybody remembers that. Out of that was born the Gay Liberation Front. And the 1971 Texas Gay Liberation Front's conference was held where? Here, House and Hall. Gay bars have been around Austin probably since the 1950s, but there wasn't really a good place for lesbian women to go and socialize and feel safe. One of our long-term members, Margaret Nunley, decided to change that. She arranged for monthly lesbian dance nights to happen here in House and Hall. And that went on for years. Margaret also lobbied this congregation to become the welcoming congregation that Reverend Chris spoke about for LGBTQ folks. Margaret told me that church leadership, when she first approached them, was initially wary. They said, "We don't want to be known as the gay church." Well, Margaret was persuasive, and here we are. The Austin Gay Men's Chorus, it's an organization that I've been involved with. I don't sing, that's why they sound so good, because I don't sing with them. Had its first performance home here at First UU. That was back in the 1980s when LGBTQ groups were shunned and not given places to perform. But First UU did the right thing, gave them space to perform, and didn't charge them for it. Now they perform in sold-out venues across the state. They performed at Carnegie Hall. Where did they get their start? They got their start right here. Many traveling LGBTQ music groups got to perform here too when so many venues in Texas shunned them. First UU also hosts the Austin LGBTQ Community Heart Circle, which I helped facilitate. It's a discussion group open to LGBTQ folks and their allies, which has roots in Austin going back to the 1990s or before. We don't know exactly when it got started. Before finding a home here at First UU, the group moved around, shared spaces all over town, rented spaces all over town, and First UU stepped up and not only offered the group a permanent home, but paid all of its expenses and has even offered facilitator training and administrative support. It's the third Sunday of every month at 2 o'clock, and you're all invited, right here. In 2019, one of Austin's most well-known drag performers and First UU congregants, Miss Kitty Litter ATX, was attacked by Alex Jones and InfoWars For doing what? For volunteering to do drag queen story time at the Austin Library. She got doxxed, has received and still receives death threats, and was shamefully persecuted, all for doing a public service. First UU had scheduled Miss Kitty to do our story for all ages, which happened right in the middle of all of this. And the positive reaction she got here was just overwhelming. Another Austin area church had invited Miss Kitty to do the same, but canceled at the last minute, closing the door to her because of Christian peer pressure. But nobody mentioned First UU's support of Miss Kitty through all of this. And Miss Kitty has done, during the pandemic, online some stuff for First UU as well, so we thank her for that. There are many more examples, but the more important thing is that this congregation simply does the right thing with grace and dignity and never asking for recognition and never attempting to proselytize. In fact, some of you may know about or have heard of Metropolitan Community Church, MCC. It started in Los Angeles in 1968 and, of course, had always had trouble finding places to hold worship service. Well, again, First UU and many other UU congregations across the country opened their doors, giving space to this struggling church to get started. And now it's a thriving denomination with hundreds of churches around the world. Before it was fashionable for churches to tolerate LGBTQ folks, First UU had been nurturing them. This all seems so progressive and forward-thinking when we look back on it now, but First UU didn't do anything more than just the right thing. I've only just spoken about what First UU has done for the LGBTQ community because this is Austin's Pride Month, but that's just one of the many facets of this church. Doing the right thing has been baked into First UU's character, and that's pretty hard to beat. History has shown us, even current history, how very rare doing the right thing can be. Thank you.